You know, I've been thinking about dreams. You use the dream metaphor a lot. It seems to me that the difference, taking it somewhere else, the difference between what you dream and what you experience in everyday life is exactly the same.
Yeah.
One imagines the dream as just the mind's fantasy, and everyday life is not.
Yeah.
But everyday life is mind's fantasy.
Yeah. Well, whatever it is, the point is that there's no outside frame of reference to tell what it is.
That's right.
So it may as well be.
Yeah.
You know, before you were born, your waking experience was non-existent. After you die, your waking experience will be non-existent. When you go to sleep, your waking experience is non-existent. When you're in a dream, your waking experience is non-existent. All of those things apply to a dream you may be having as well. So before you had the dream was non-existent in its world, and so on and so forth.
But if you're in the present, there's something significantly different about being there than in a dream. Because you're not creating an experience. You are the experience. Does that make sense? I think. Most of the time, people create their experience in their heads. Well, maybe experience is the wrong word. Their reality, they create their reality in their heads. But if you're really in the moment and in the present, you're not creating a reality. You are the reality.
Well, I think that's always the case. I think that, rather than looking at waking versus dreams and, reality versus unreality or something, I think it's more valuable to look at appearances versus actuality. What appears and the way that it appears is always the same, and it's not always the same, appearing always the same, but it's always intrinsically in the same relationship to what this is. So deep sleep appears to be deep sleep, waking world appears to be waking world, dream appears to be dream, and so on and so forth. But those appearances, that they can appear at all, is this, and what it appears in is this, and this is the important fact rather than the appearances. Now the appearances don't depart from what it appears in, so it's a subtle interrelationship. So you can actually explore what this is through the appearances. The appearances are not other than this, and yet the appearances do not capture this. So it's tricky to try to pin down that relationship. Dream is nothing other than sleep, but sleep is more than appears in the dream, and yet what appears in the dream is nothing other than sleep. So so it's a kind of it's an inequality in a way. What appears does not depart from reality, and exists within reality, and is created by reality, and is experienced by reality. And yet what appearances present as degrees of partiality. Yes, and not really, but it can seem to be that, whereas reality is not partial. The important thing is to understand experience itself, not any particular experience or what it looks like. So what experience is reality. And this is true whether it looks like waking or dream or deep sleep or death or life or whatever. It is the same reality. Reality does not change. Reality is absolutely immutable, is absolutely itself. And yet, because of reality, all of these appearances appear within it. It appears as all of these appearances. And these appearances can be wildly differing from each other, obviously. And yet, the appearances don't depart from reality, exist within reality, are created solely by reality. And, our challenge from a spiritual point of view is we are very used to orienting to experiences. We are generally not used to orienting to experience itself. So, we're used to see what we think we're seeing. We're not used to seeing. We're not used to seeing experience. We're used to seeing, a room and people and chairs and blah, 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 all the differentiations that we categorize. So this is the important point, is to learn to relate to experience itself rather than the way it is presenting, rather than the way it appears in any particular context.
And that, from what you say, seems to develop, or it's not a static thing.
I'm sorry?
It's not necessarily static. Awareness of experience as experience itself can deepen.
Well, it's all very slippery. Reality itself doesn't change.
Not reality, but the awareness of experience.
Right.
As I understand from what you.
Yeah, that can seem to deepen. Sure, all these things can seem to happen, but that's just more appearances. And that's fine, because it is in the context of appearances that reality is present, and vice versa. You never get the one without the other, of course. The main point is to try to learn to direct your attention towards experience itself, not what is being experienced as appearances.
Well, when you see that, it seems as if there's something more to that, or that can be enhanced by focusing more on that than the content of it.
Yeah, exactly. Sure.
I mean, it's like maybe continue that, or more that than content, or maybe
whatever. Sure, yeah. There's always content present. There's always reality present, and that's fine. Our main challenge from a spiritual point of view is we're so used to focusing on content to the extent that we don't even know there's anything else. We're used to relating, to identifying with our bodies, our personalities, our events of our lives, our history, the outer environment, blah, 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 all these various things we categorize, all of which are appearances, and none of which are intrinsically experience itself, let's say, or reality itself.
Isn't that what spirituality is? I mean,
Isn't which?
The awareness of experience as opposed to the content of experience.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what.
Yeah, sure. That's it. But it's subtle because to learn to distinguish, to learn to discriminate is very tricky because it's very easy to mistake subtle levels of appearance for experience itself. Experience is like a clear window that everything appears in. And, so imagine a window that's so clear that you can't even see that it's there. It's just, it's like a window cleaner's dream advertisement. It's like, oh yes, it's so clean it doesn't even exist. And so anything you see, all you see is what you're seeing through it, and you don't even see the window itself because it's just so clean, it's so clear, it's so pristine. And that's this, exactly. And yet it's not nothing. It's very much something. In fact, it's the only thing. There are no other things. The only thing is the window, because the window is more like a mirror, and everything that appears in it isn't actually there. It only appears because the window is there, or because the mirror is there, you might say. So everything that you experience, basically all appearances, are appearing in and made of, substantially made of, this actual condition. There's one thing here. It's actually a thing. Reality is actually a thing. It's the only thing, in fact. There are no other things. And yet all apparent things appear because of the nature of this actual thing.
Interpretation.
Sorry?
Interpretation.
Sure, yeah.
That's the apparent things.
Yeah.
Right. So Peter, we have a question here. The question is what I see right now this or an appearance in this?
Both.
They come together.
Yeah, they're inseparable. But you can't see this as a thing, even though it's the only thing. Anything that seems to have any qualities that are at all delineatable is an appearance. And we're distinguishing between appearance and reality, but in actuality that can't be done.
Thanks.
The distinguishing itself is an arbitrary thing. It's a function of reality.
Yeah.
It's like an activity here.
Yeah. But in coming to this, it can be useful to learn to discriminate, learn that appearances are appearances. Basically, anything that comes and goes is an appearance.
Right.
Anything that has any transient nature or changeability whatsoever is an appearance. The reality itself does not change, does not come and go. And in actuality, the appearances and reality are one. But to come to see that, it can be useful at first to discriminate, to separate them out, and because we're so used to orienting towards appearances as if they were the real thing, as if they were reality, and to get that there's something else that the appearances actually consist of, that the appearances exist within, let's say, that is generating all the appearances. And then the fact that the appearances are that, you can come to that after you've gotten that there is a that.
That really simplifies things.
Good.
Very tired.
Tidy.
And this is why the dream analogy is so useful, because a dream, the relationship of apparent events in a dream to sleep is exactly identical to the relationship of all appearances to, or any appearance, let's say, to reality itself. You know, in a dream things appear but nothing's actually there. In a dream things appear but nothing's actually happening. In a dream things appear and you may seem to be there and seem to be in an environment and so on, but that's actually not the case. And all of that is exactly true always. And this condition, you know, any appearances whatsoever are being generated by reality, but are not events. They don't exist in the way that they seem to exist. They are not autonomous. They have no substance other than they borrow their apparent substantiality from the actuality of reality itself. They have no substance whatsoever. Just like in a dream. You know, in a dream nothing there has any substance, but it can seem to have substance because of the actuality of the dreaming consciousness.
It's known with greater and greater awareness.
Sure, yeah. Sure. You know, the spiritual unfoldment consists of coming to understand this condition, but, you know, in greater depth and with greater clarity. Sure. I mean, it's knowable. It can be known. You know, because this condition is itself. This condition is what's knowing everything anyway. So this condition has the power to know itself, to recognize itself, because it is that. So it can meet it. It can meet itself where it is. It can meet itself as it is.
Makes all these other things like a red herring.
Yeah. Yeah, just distractions.
This just seems really focused.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what you can really pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly so. You know, it's a matter of not being distracted, of getting the relationship between appearances and actuality, and not getting seduced into appearances as being actuality. You know, and it's very subtle and slippery, because in one sense appearances are actuality, because they're nothing but actuality, but in another sense the way in which they're being presented as if they were autonomously actual is totally false. You know, appearances are actual appearances, but that's all. Like in a dream.
Yeah. Now that's where it gets slippery, or that's where it's not completely obvious.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's never obvious, because it's endlessly subtle.
Yeah.
Because the nature of reality is such that it endlessly spits off appearances. it's never naked. It always is showing up as something.
I don't know.
Seems like that would be a limitation on reality to say it.
I
You
don't
can
think
never
it's
not
true.
show up as something.
That's not my experience.
Does it have rules?
No, it has its nature in the sense that it is what it is.
I'm trying to think of the dream analogy. You often contrast the dream and the dreamer, or the dream and sleep.
Right.
I can never visualize the sleep or the dreamer. And yet, in that investigation, it seems like the dreamer. I mean, this is the old consciousness and the object of consciousness. The duality again.
Yeah.
Is there really a duality there? At any time, can a person really wake up as the dreamer and have the dream disappear?
No, this is what I'm saying, essentially.
So we're defined by in the sense we're defined by the illusion. Except that the illusion is a misunderstanding.
Yeah. I wouldn't say we're defined by it, but we are always presented as the illusion, or the illusion is always presenting itself.
There's no point where the snake and the rope are different. It's just when
No.
you
Right, never. No, they're not
can't
different.
separate them.
No, they're not different at all. Yeah. And thinking it's a snake and or a rope is what gets us into problems.
And
Thinking it, it's
both are illusion.
well, even thinking of it as an illusion is not. Appearance is not illusion. Appearance is illusion as actuality, but it is authentic as appearance. So the snake is authentic as is an authentic misinterpretation, but it's an illusory snake.
But the rope's an authentic misinterpretation too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the analogy only goes so far.
As soon as you're that body, you're stuck with both.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying. It's never one or the other, and it never one pole doesn't ever collapse. It's like in terms of Hindu mythology, Shiva Shakti. Shiva is always with Shakti, and Shakti is always with Shiva. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. There's no limit to how subtle the presentations of this can be, but it unendingly shines forth as presentations.
It's interesting how we have this addiction to wanting it to be separate. To wanting like the Buddhist idea of like trying to find the no thought.
Yeah.
The place where we'll be free of the apparent entrapment of experience, and
Right.
just to sort of like do away with that notion that there will be a point where we kind of go
Yeah.
into the abyss.
Yeah. But the actuality is we are free of appearances in appearances, because appearances are nothing but reality itself. So appearances are in actuality not entrapping. Appearances are in actuality nothing at all. They're just like a dream. So they're appearing, and you can't, and they have absolutely nothing else whatsoever you can say about them except that they're appearing. So what's entrapping is misinterpreting them as actual, as an actual environment or actual circumstances or actual history or actual cause and effect and so on and so forth.
I mean, it's also a little like the whole idea of fantasy, which is the other way around, where we actually think there is an experience when in fact it's just being created by the mind.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Except there's an experience. Except there is an experience.
Yeah, there is an experience. But
Yeah, well, there's this. I mean, you can't say what it is.
Yeah,
Right.
that's an
You can call it an experience.
yeah. I
There's
am a
this
person,
one.
so I experienced this. This exists without me. But,
Yeah.
but
Hmm?
maybe that's wrong.
All of those conditions collapse down to this.
Exactly.
You know, this is this. You are experiencing your experience. You are John, and you have your life. Blah 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 blah. All those are different ways of saying the same thing.
It's an experience.
But they're saying exactly the same thing. There's nothing else for them to say.
But John is not necessary for this.
Mhm.
That's what I'm saying. That this.
Well, yeah,
Well,
John's
an
just an
aspect of this.
interpretation.
This is not dependent on experience.
Right, it's not dependent on experience. Experience is dependent upon it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
This is also experience. It's-
Sure.
So that's its creative mode, if you will.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it always,
It's
that's what I'm saying.
constitutes this.
It always shows up as something. It always
right.
has appearance. I mean, which again can be infinitely subtle and tenuous to be essentially interpretable as nothingness or something, but a nothingness that
It's still
that is
something.
appearing as a nothingness is an appearance.
Right. Mm.
I mean, but that's like saying, if a tree falls in the forest, does it hurt? I mean, if there is no experience of this, then can we really say that this can be without experience?
Oh.
Well, but that's all theoretical.
Yeah,
See, I was
there's an
gonna say,
assumption
in
that there's
theory
a
you can-
forest.
In theory, you
And
can
that there's
say
a tree.
You can't know that.
But in experience,
It's not important.
Experience.
Maybe it might be.
You work on it.
everybody understands this.
Your homework.
I mean, it's something you can't know.
Well, if you're at a point where that's the burning issue, I'd say you're doing very well.
Or very badly.
You're doing very well, but it's not.
That's an interpretation.
But it's not going to go anywhere.
Prognosis is good.
I'm assuming there's a damn forest.
Oh, Peter, there's another question here. I think you just answered it, that I guess he wants a little more here. It says, could there be consciousness, reality without appearances? It seems they are both dependent on each other.
It's all one and the same. There is no such thing as consciousness. There's no thing that's separate from anything else. There's no appearances that are separate from consciousness. There's no consciousness separate from appearances. All of these different names are attributes that we assert about this actuality. We assert about this actuality that there is consciousness. We assert about this actuality that there is appearances. We assert about this actuality that there is existence. We assert about this all these qualities that we can designate are just things we're asserting about this actuality. And this actuality is itself. It doesn't come in pieces. It doesn't come in parts. It doesn't have, this half and that half. Analytically, it can look as if that was the case. You can look at appearances in consciousness and all of this, or you can claim to, but you can't find actually any consciousness, isolated consciousness to actually look at. You can't find any isolated appearances to actually look at.
This can't be known without this consciousness. So I guess it depends what you mean by consciousness.
Yeah, I mean,
I suppose that I have the sense that if I kind of really get that the whole of experience will sort of overwhelm me intrinsically. I know that's not necessarily true, but there is a sense of the enormity of this understanding that is.
yeah. Well, it is. It is enormous, but it's ungraspable, so it's not like you need to grasp it. And the ungraspability is the same old ungraspability it's always been. So it's not like, in a sense, it's exactly like it is right now. And it's not graspable now, but it won't. If you're nakedly, absolutely, completely faced with it, it's exactly the same as right now, because this is that. This is that.
It's probably underwhelming rather than overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because you see the emptiness of it.
Yeah. What's overwhelmed is the normal erroneous
Right.
perspective. That gets overwhelmed. But that was never much of anything anyway, and the extent to which you identify with that is the extent to which it's overwhelming. And for people that have been exploring this with any degree of subtlety at all, there's probably already less identification with that mode, so there's less danger of catastrophe in encountering the actuality of this primacy.
What might seem overwhelming, I would imagine, is the loss of all the identification and all the
Sure.
Have we talked about this before sometime?
You're having a deja vu.
Well, I've been noticing that, I don't know whether it's just post-anesthetic experience or not, that everything's been kind of like coming out intensely to meet me in like a multi-dimensional manner.
Uh-huh.
As opposed to, seeing experiences, a flat sort of thing that is, the radiance seems to be more,
Well, but you have been, karmically, you have been through a major displacement. You've been thrust out of your normalcy and your status quo due to your health issues and due to the surgery, due to the anesthesia, you are already, engaged with things with a freshness and an unpredictability that is perhaps a little more in your face, undeniable than may have been the case in the past. So, yeah, sure. From a spiritual point of view, these things are a great advantage. These sort of karmic crisis situations are a great advantage for that very reason, that they do have a tendency to precipitate us out of our sense of normalcy, out of our sense of continuity, which has a tendency to create a dullness or a lifelessness or a monodimensionality or what have you.
Yeah, it sort of seems like there isn't any rock to stand on.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, exactly so.
I can theoretically come up with, some that I've had before.
Yeah.
But when I actually go and look there, they're really not apparent.
Right, which is the actual condition. Mm-hmm. And so being thrust into that is being thrust into actuality. And our dullness and our normalcy looks like a rock to stand on, looks like a context or a frame of reference that is more or less unconsciously held to be true or reliable or some kind of actual status quo that has some persistence and so on and so forth. And the rude awakening that there's no such thing thrusts us into this spontaneity, into this, that, hey, here I am on this tightrope and there's no net. There is no net. There's no safety net. And that's, from a spiritual point of view, that's a great place to be. Because, again, you can see the actual condition.
Well, it's very clear that the experiencing, and the experience that none of the things that I appear to be seeing are really of any, they're not, there's nothing solid there.
Sure, yeah. And that's the case.
Even though I can look and go, oh yeah, there's Peter.
Yeah, no, that's the case. There's as much solidity as there ever was, but the solidity only exists experientially in the moment, and it has no actual stability or persistence whatsoever.
And even the scenes that appear, that we're familiar with, they've even been disrupted.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you see the freshness. You see the fact of non-repeatability, that in fact everything that happens has never happened before. And everything that has happened before is gone forever. It's just always just this surprising moment of, wow.
Just sort of stepping out on it.
Yeah, always eternally stepping out. Yeah.
It's even less than a tightrope. It's like you're in space and you have arbitrary focus points that you realize that they're just arbitrary.
Sure.
You can put them anywhere you like because there's just space.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
It's way cool. I mean,
because you can literally, since they're all arbitrary, find any point you want.
Yeah.
Make one up.
Totally. Works for me.
Yeah, I know. Yes, it does. Works for me too.
But that doesn't preclude other approaches.
Oh no, there's nothing but approaches. I mean, any approach, again, have at it.
That's all there is approaches.
Yeah, you can avoid karmic encounters, John, do so.
It's interesting that the things which from a spiritual point of view are most advantageous are generally the things which people from a so-called non-spiritual context are most in dread of. Anything that upsets the status quo, anything that threatens life or persistence or continuity or tomorrow being exactly like today, people get very, very perturbed about. Yeah. And in actuality, these are, from the spiritual point of view, these are our greatest advantages, greatest opportunities.
Well, I tend to notice myself wanting to kind of scramble back to some sort of normal.
Sure.
Normal, and yet in examining that, I actually find there isn't anything there.
Yeah.
That there never was anything there.
Yeah.
Not that that's good or bad, but it just is, sort of more evident.
Yeah, sure.
So it just, it's okay in this context, but when I'm, at home alone or
yeah, sure.
out on the street, it's a little disorienting to figure out, like, okay, so then how then shall we live?
Yeah, yeah. But these questions are, or these issues are, are always the primal fork in the roads from a spiritual point of view. Reality or a comfortable delusion. Reality or comfortable delusion. And every instant you're at that fork in the roads with and
which isn't really a fork.
No, of course not.
But it just becomes more glaring in a sense.
Yeah.
Once you get used to it, you don't have to really choose. There is no reality.
No, of course.
Or delusions. It's just
Ultimately, it's all the same, and it doesn't matter anymore. Yeah. But when you're addicted to the pretty lies, when you're addicted to the nice, safe, warm, dullness of delusion, the siren call of the.
Mostly that's all just thought anyway.
Of course, yeah.
It's not actual experience or reality.
No, of course.
It's just kind of an overlay.
Well, yeah, of course, exactly. Experience is always flaunting its spontaneity. Experience is always completely flaunting its unresolvedness and its infinity. That's why the Dzogchen techniques are always to go to actual experience, and you will have samsara ripped away from you, because experience is entirely, spectacularly, transcendental. But and we have to actively and forcibly and with a continual reinforcement supply this continuity and this dullness because experience has none of that intrinsically, none at all. The experience is raw, fresh, new, non-repeating, unresolvable. All of these things so obviously, so blatantly.
Peter.
Yeah.
Someone has a question on here, a comment, and they ask a question about it. Deep sleep seems like it's happened before and seems to happen in the same way. It's not as fresh as other appearances. What is deep sleep? Is it this without this?
Well, I would argue that deep sleep may seem to be like that from the waking perspective, but from the deep sleep perspective, it is actually very fresh and very non-repeating. But it's very difficult to access the deep sleep perspective from the waking condition because it's so alien. Qualitatively, it's so alien from our waking modes of orienting to experience. But I would say deep sleep is always very unique, very fresh, very spontaneous, and very dynamic. Although when we think of it from the waking condition, it seems like a dullness or a blankness or a or a fuzzy, a sort of a homogeneous fuzziness or something. But I think in its own context, it's not like that at all.
Yeah, the blankness is an interpretation.
Sure. Yeah, so sleep is an intense dynamism. But it's of a whole other, it's of an order that does not compute at all to the waking mind. So the waking mind can't see that there's anything there, can't recall it at all, because it's so alien. But the important thing is not to try to analyze these different conditions and compare them and find the ways that they're same and the way they're different. The important thing is to see that to see the common denominator of what all these conditions are, which is they are intrinsically, various wildly divergent degrees of appearance of reality with itself, within the context of reality and perceived by reality. That's the important fact. And then, psychologists or scientists who are studying, the states of awareness can get into trying to subcategorize all these different states and the way they seem to work. But from a spiritual point of view, all that stuff is complete red herring. The important fact is discovering the common denominator. And it's always the same in all conditions, in all these states. It's always the fundamental condition is always exactly the same. Is this astounding, transcendental, infinite being, which by its very nature tends to appear to itself with an infinite range of apparent qualities. And all these different states and conditions exist in the same place, exist in the same substratum, are perceived in the same way. So there's only one event happening here. So when deep sleep's happening, it's this event. When waking's happening, it's this event. When dream's happening, it's this event. When death is happening, it's this event. And so the important thing is, what's this event? What's the event? Not what's waking? What's sleep? It's like, who cares? What's the event? What is happening here? What is it that's happening here? That's the real interesting question.
But if you find that, or you think you found it, it's just another interpretation.
Well, if you find an interpretation, it is. But the actuality is present. And the actuality is capable of recognizing itself. In fact, it's capable of nothing else.
And actually finding an interpretation implies finding reality, so...
Well, it's interpretations is a presentation of reality. Not finding reality is a presentation of finding reality. Being lost in delusion is a presentation of finding reality. It's very slippery.
Peter, is there any difference between the experience of holding something to be something and not holding something and not acknowledging that you're not holding something to be?
When you say, is there a difference, what do you mean by that? There's no actual difference in the fundamental event. The fundamental event is always the same.
Well, I mean, okay, so I think that I'm doing some noticing now. I mean, it feels like there's something going on in terms of my experience, and so I notice now that I hold whatever's happening. I hold something to. I have an interpretation or a worldview, and I notice that now.
Good.
So when I notice it, it's like it's a springboard to say, no, that's not what this is, and so then I just drop it or I just let it go on. But I'm trying to understand the difference between if I just have a vanilla experience and not hold something to be, or not have any kind of worldview, or not have any kind of narrative or interpretation.
Right.
I'm trying to make some kind of distinction, but maybe it's futile.
Well, some degree of interpretation will always tend to be going on, but when a degree of interpretation is going on, it's going on in a context which is not that.
Right.
So, in other words, there's always some degree of interpretation going on, but there's always also degrees of non-interpretation going on. So interpretation always happens in a context of non-interpretation, of actuality.
But I don't, I must not feel what that feels like, because I'm always feeling some kind of holding pattern.
Sure. Okay. But you can feel it to an extent, and that's the main thing. That's what noticing consists of.
Well,
So example, when you see things, say you see things and you're thinking, oh, this is people in a room and whatever. So there's the interpretations, there's the worldview, but there's also just the presence of light, and you can't say what the light is, right?
right.
Or there's thought and you're thinking things and that's all happening, but there's also just some weird little presences. In other words, try and find something in your experience that you can't get a handle on, and that's very, very easy to do. Just look some, if you find it hard or challenging, look somewhere where you're not used to looking.
Well, it could be something like seeing or hearing or touching. I can't get a
Sure.
handle on seeing. I
Yeah.
can't get a handle on
Yeah.
touching.
So, but be with the fact of that, not as an abstraction, not as the thought of that, but feel what light feels like, and I get that. Wow, this is not an abstraction. I'm not thinking this. I'm feeling this presence of actual light. It's not an idea I can think about. I can think I'm feeling light, but that thought happens concurrently with the actual feeling, which is not the thought.
Yeah.
The thought's over here, and the feeling is here.
Well, the feeling of seeing and the feeling of touching is the same thing, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but that's the point is worldviews and interpretations are fine, but they're never total. They always exist in a field which is other than them.
Right.
And that field is experiential. You're actually experiencing that field. So just notice that you are experiencing it. And you don't need to resolve it. It's unresolvable. Just notice it. Just sort of touch. It's like in baseball, you just have to touch the base. You don't need to stand there and hang out. You just touch it.
Yeah.
So you just get that, okay, I'm holding this to be, such and such a situation and blah, 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 blah. But you can just be with the presence of sound or the presence of sensation or the presence of thought or something, just for an instant, just that, oh yeah, That's actual. That's not an idea. And I have no idea what it is. I can't pin it down. And just that. And then you let it go. You don't need to hold it or hang on to it or try and stay there.
Yeah.
Just notice that there's more than a worldview. There's more than an interpretation. Anywhere, any way you can notice that. Just notice it and bing, then just let it go. And then again, sometime when it's convenient, in the next minute or 5 minutes or hour or day or whatever, just do that again. And just keep doing that over and over.
You know, I finished the first meditation on the retreat, which is interesting to me because I didn't understand, and I probably still don't, because it kind of like is a comment to me where you kept saying like it doesn't matter, and I still just trying to understand what you meant by that. So that was kind of interesting.
Well, whatever happens, here you are.
Yeah.
And then something happens or doesn't happen, and here you are. So how much could it have mattered? It's like, I didn't get it, but here I am. So how much could it matter that you didn't get it? Because this is not being changed by anything. So anything doesn't matter, because it never takes you away from this. It doesn't matter. Because nothing actually changes, nothing actually affects this condition. Nothing stops it, nothing starts it, nothing makes it better, nothing makes it worse, nothing makes it clearer, nothing makes it any less clear. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what you think, because here you are. And here you are again. And that's always the case. Nothing can budge that. Nothing can take you away from that. And that's the interesting fact, because here you are, just as here you are, that's the whole shooting match right now. Just here you are. That's everything. There's nothing but that. That's what all the fuss is about.
But it's not really you.
Don't try to make sense of it, or it's not how it's being put, it's the fact. When I say here you are, it's not about here or you or are, it's just this.
It's a feeling of you.
Sure. Yeah. But it doesn't matter whether you call it you or not. And it doesn't matter whether that makes sense or not. And it doesn't matter whether you try and figure it out or not, because here you are. So how much does it matter? Nothing happens. In other words, this condition never departs from itself. It's always just exactly this condition. And it can seem to be this and that and the other, and doing this and doing that, and not doing this and not doing that, and blah blah. And yet, here you are. So what was actually done? Absolutely nothing. And here you are.
Yeah, the delusion is very strong, that we'll be off to do something, or something will happen that will change that reality.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's like the ultimate.
Yeah. Yeah. But whatever happens, it doesn't happen. It'll happen and it won't happen, and then here you are. Right?
Peter, when Susan was saying that sometimes she'll notice that she's holding a certain, you said holding, I guess, a definition or an identity or something, whatever. That very moment in which the identification or the holding is being noticed, that's the place to look,
Yeah,
because that's this.
yeah,
This is creating the holding, and this is also creating the awareness of the holding.
absolutely.
And this is
seeing
aware
it.
of itself.
Yeah. And that's the here you are.
Don't even, yeah, exactly.
So I'm holding it, I'm holding, and here you are.
Right. So you don't even have to go somewhere else. If you want, you can stay there with that.
Yeah.
No,
Never go anywhere else. Just here you are.
right.
So it's always just this. When I say this, I do mean this. I don't mean some this over there. I mean this.
You don't mean that this?
This, I mean this here now.
That? There?
So even in the deepest, darkest confusion and illusion, that's an experience.
Well, sure, here you are.
This is this.
Yeah, exactly. You never. The fundamental condition never departs from itself. Never. And is completely independent of what seems to be appearing. It's not dependent upon what seems to be appearing. Nothing that appears can damage or change this fundamental event. And nothing whatsoever that appears can improve this fundamental event. So this being, this presence, this isness, this here you are, is immutable. And is invulnerable, and nothing you do matters with regard to it. Nothing. So you can be, in extreme pain and suffering and confusion and depression and all of that, and what? Here you are. Or you can be in great joy and elation and transcendence and insight and all that, and what? Here you are. And this actuality is the truth, is reality. Just this actuality right here. And it never changes. What it looks like, what appears is always changing. Instantaneously, that with absolutely zero persistence whatsoever. But what it is, the actuality of it, the being of it, the isness of it, the here you are of it, it's always exactly the same.
The way I relate to that best is to say that I'm aware of my existence, and I can leave the my off. Of whatever is happening, I know that exists.
Sure.
And that existence is the thing that doesn't change.
Yeah. And even more powerful than the knowing of it is the feeling of it, the being of it. I mean, you could say that's a synonym for knowing, and it is certainly. But it's a concrete engagement. It's not. You know it because you are it. So it's
No, you don't have to make the extra effort to know it.
Yeah, knowing is superfluous. It is intrinsically a knowing. It knows itself. Being is a knowing. But just this actuality. I mean, that's the whole thing. Just this actuality, and it doesn't fluctuate by a hair. It's always exactly the same actuality. Doesn't come, doesn't go. It can't. It never will. It never will come and go. When you're in deepest sleep, it's still this actuality. When you're dreaming, it's still this actuality. When you're awake, it's still this actuality. This actuality, it's something, it's a thing, it's real, it's the only thing. You know, it's not an abstraction. This actuality is actually, it is, not is in the abstract, but is in the most concrete way.
Well, the thing about appearances is that for a long time they seem to be misleading
Yeah.
until you can be with the energy.
Yeah. And then you see that appearances are the actuality shining forth. And they're nothing in themselves. I mean, that's why I like this phrase, radiant presence. Presence is this actuality, and radiance is the fact that it unendingly shines forth as all of these apparent qualities. And there's nothing else. And there's always that. Yeah, it's always present, and it's always radiant. And just feeling that fact, seeing the self-evident actuality of that fact is the finish line.
Can any distinction be made between presence and existence? Is there any subtle difference? Or are they
No,
just
nothing at all.
They're
No.
just the same thing you're talking about.
Yeah, and again, as abstractions, you could possibly split hairs all day, but the actuality of existence and the actuality of presence are one and the same, because there's only one actuality, and actual existence must be referring to this, and actual presence must be referring to this, so they converge. They're synonyms. And as abstractions, you can endlessly draw differences and split hairs, but who cares? That's just abstractions. I mean, when you get that there's only one thing, this radiant presence, then all abstractions become fairly easy because you get that they all must refer to this. Every one of them. So they're all synonyms. So every word whatsoever is actually a synonym.
There's getting that on different levels, though.
Well, absolutely.
And, because I sort of can hear and intellectually understand, and then sometimes there is an experience of that, but it's like, I guess there becomes a point where that there's not a question about that. It's just an automatic understanding, like a deepening or a...
Yeah. It's kind of you inhabit it to with greater and greater certainty, greater and greater obviousness. At first, it might be something you sort of see over there, and after a while, it's something that you actually live in, and then after a while, it's something you are.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of familiarity, really.
So the thing that can point in that direction more is the examination. I mean, I find examination to be useful.
Yeah, there's all different. But remember that. Just remember that. Keep converging on actuality. Keep converging on presence. Keep converging on what is, and then you'll see the way everything has to come together in this. And then, so this actuality is the point of simplification. Everything unifies in this actuality. Because nothing can depart from this actuality, or else it's just bullshit. Right? If it doesn't refer to this actuality, then it doesn't refer to anything. Because this is the only thing around for it to refer to. But you can get that examination, you can get that through analysis, you can get that just through sort of textual experience. I mean, you can get that on any level. There's all different sorts of ways to be with it. But you're being with the same fundamental orientation in every case. And all those will tend to converge after a while too, all those different ways of approaching it. Should we take a little break? We're back.
There are ramifications of this
Mm-hmm.
that are not obvious
Mm-hmm.
and are obscured.
Are we back on?
Yes.
I mean, I have this feeling that there are enormous ramifications,
Sure. Yeah.
even beyond the obvious.
Sure. Yeah. It's an entirely different context than is ever thought within any human framework.
And yet, they are very obvious.
Well, sure, it's obvious. It's obvious when you see it in its own context.
Is it?
It's so interesting, you know, it's like I can hear the words and I can understand, but my understanding is only what it is at the time.
Right.
And,
Yes. Exactly so.
And it's only so much. And
Right.
I get it,
Right.
but I know that there's huge
Yeah.
amount that I don't get.
Yeah. And that's what unfoldment's about. Unfoldment is coming into that, is integrating that, is unfolding into the context with greater and greater fullness and greater integration.
It seems to me that it's important to keep coming back to that. I mean, to
Yeah.
not let that slip away when that awareness comes, to
Yeah.
just pay attention to it,
Yeah.
to not take it lightly, but just,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, give it the weight it deserves, and it
Yeah.
deserves all weight. But at the same time, you need to be artful with it and intelligent, which demands delicacy, demands looseness, demands ease, and it's greatly facilitated by a certain amount of playfulness and wit. So it's subtle. Just simply being heavy-handed and dutiful with it is not the optimal way to approach it.
well, I think it shows itself.
Certainly, yes, it does. It shows itself. It teaches itself.
Yeah.
And being with it, it shows you how to be with it. So again, it does show itself. It teaches you how to be with it.
It being you,
Well,
and you being it.
well,
but,
sure, of course.
But that's another big part of it.
Sure. Yeah, and it shows you that as well.
Yeah. Um,
I find it's most simple and productive to think of this as this. And it doesn't exclude you, but you don't need to. If you approach it as you, that's true. It is you. But we have it's such a morass of our confusion in terms of our own self-image and our own self-identification. Whereas if we start looking at it in the absolute objective, which it also of course is, we can look at it a little more freshly from the get-go without needing to ramp up. And then the you-ness is revealed as that without having to confront the convolutions of those issues that we've built up over a lifetime.
And I see it as almost an abstraction. I see it as a intellectual
But this is an
forcing of experience.
right. But this is an actuality. I mean, this it really is here. This it's not an abstraction that this is present. Presence is not an abstraction.
But to separate the two.
Well, you don't need to. I'm not talking about being anal about trying to separate it or not, but just simply being with the fact of presence,
Right.
which is a fact, and as a fact, it's an objective fact. But it's not an abstraction. The fact of presence is it's a fact. It's concrete.
It's a focus.
You could say that. You could say it's a focus.
Pay attention to the actuality of experiencing,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah.
what you're experiencing.
Yes, and that is the essence of yoga. It's a very, very powerful yoga, is to give your attention to actuality, the actuality of experiencing.
Now,
It's not intellectual.
It's very much not intellectual. You can think about it, but it itself is extremely concrete. It's absolutely actual.
but to say that is more actual than the content of it,
No, it's not more actual.
it's, is it?
The content
No.
of
That you were
experiences.
saying that the content really is just an interpretation and it's not as real as...
No.
Oh.
Don't think in terms of... Everything is equally real. There's nothing that is not as real. It's not a matter of things being more or less real. Anything that exists at all is 100% real. Anything that doesn't exist is 100% unreal. It doesn't exist and doesn't show up in experience, because for something to show up in experience, it has to be real. It has to be actual. So thinking in terms of degrees of reality is just going to be endlessly confusing. But think more in terms of common denominator, and less in terms of specific instances. So try and be with what is more universally the case. So actuality or presence is universally factual, universally actual, right? And then I can say, and my vision is appearing within this actuality, my hearing is appearing within this actuality, and this that I'm seeing and that I'm seeing and this that I'm seeing is appearing within this actuality. But the actuality is a common denominator that includes all of those specific instances. So this is the point, is to get more to the fundamental event and less into these elaborated differentiations that we're so familiar with orienting to. We're very used to orienting to, our bodies, towards other people, towards environments, towards situations, all of which are specific instances occurring within the fundamental unified field of actuality, of presence. And we're much more used to giving our attention to all these specifics, and not giving our attention to the fundamental fact. And so this is the point. It's not that the specifics are unimportant or less actual. It's just that we've already given them a lot of attention. So this is kind of a remedial education to pay attention to that which we're used to ignoring. And then in that context, we will have a more accurate way of assessing the relationship of all of these aspects of experience to each other.
They lose a lot of their importance.
Yeah, sure. Sure. And again, the dream analogy is so obvious, when you notice the fact of dreaming, the fact of whether you happen to be dreaming about this or that becomes much more trivial by relationship to the fact that it's all just dreaming than if you don't know it's dreaming and you're just obsessing upon the particular apparent events.
But also the detail seems more precise.
Sure.
As a consequence.
Mm-hmm. Sure, because detail is actuality.
Peter, you open by talking about reality as analogous to a clear, absolutely clear plane of glass.
Mm-hmm.
How literal is that?
It's not. It's a way of indicating that reality is omnipresent, and all of the specifics that we're within experience that we're used to orienting towards exist within reality, and we tend to notice the specifics and not notice the reality that exists within. Very much in the same way as the perfect clear glass, where you are not going to be looking at the glass, you're going to be looking through the glass at whatever you think you're seeing.
Or like the dreamer in a dream?
Yeah, same thing.
Like dreaming in a dream.
Yeah. We don't usually see the dreaming, we usually see what is being dreamed. Mm-hmm. Even though in actuality all we're looking at is the dreaming, but we aren't aware of that because we're fixating on these particular images.
Right.
And likewise, within experience, everything that presents itself, all of the detail, all of the apparitions, exist within and consist of the concrete actuality of reality, of presence. But we don't see that, we see the details. I mean, by and large, generally. Because the nature of, the analogy of a perfectly clear glass holds. It's not literally true, but it's a very good analogy. Because reality is obvious when you know how to see it, but it's elusive in the extreme when you don't. Reality is actuality. And actuality may sound like an abstraction, but when you learn how to see that actuality is not an abstraction, actuality is concrete, then you're learning how to see the glass. Actuality is not an abstraction. Actuality is a thing.
That must be the surprise of becoming aware of reality. The real surprise is...
Yeah. It is surprising. It's very surprising because in a lot of ways everything turns inside out.
There are a lot of surprises.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's one major surprise.
But yeah, I mean, we're used to thinking, or we may be used to thinking that being and actuality, even though they're sort of real in some sense, they think of them as these loose abstractions. Whereas in actuality, being and actuality are the sole concrete actual facts. And all the other things we think of as facts are abstractions within that.
Reflections, phantoms.
Yeah. So when you get that, and you get, oh, I'm looking at reality here. Not real. I'm looking at reality as an abstraction, but I am looking at a thing that is reality, and that happens to look like a room with these people in it, and this body, and these thoughts, and blah 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 blah. But this is an actual thing, in actuality, a concrete presence that happens to look like that. As opposed to the actuality of all of these differentiations existing independently, and the being or the reality being an abstraction. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that the actuality, the being, is the concrete fact here. In other words, there's all these atoms, right? There's all of these atoms, and your body's in the air and everything. There's just all these atoms dancing around, right? And in a materialistic fantasy, you might think the atoms are real, the atoms really exist, they're really here, and that the atoms exist is an abstraction about the atoms that are real. Whereas in actuality, what's real is the existence, is the being, and the atoms are an abstraction in a sense of the actuality. This is a fruitless train of thought. I better drink more cider. Yeah.
Okay, here's a
You're
train
getting
of thought.
into stuff that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Here's a train of thought going on, and I'm going to read from. It's the same person, but in a couple of pieces. Okay. Does noticing this mean feeling peaceful and blissful? Isn't it peace in the sense that seeking stops at least?
It's peace in the sense that all conundrums are resolved. It's peace in the sense that there's nothing left to be achieved, nothing to avoid, nothing to struggle with.
Personally, I would say conundrums are irrelevant, they're not resolved.
Yeah. Conundrums become irrelevant.
Well,
They're not conundrums anymore.
problems stop being problematic.
Yes, problems stop being problems.
They aren't solved, but they're solved but they stop being
By saying that they're
problems.
not really
Yes,
there.
they're not.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's peace. It's not a simplistic, sort of a new agey idea of peace, of sort of lying back with a shit-eating grin on your face and smelling daisies all day or something. Although you could probably do that if you can get away with it.
I don't think daisies have any smell. But it's an old expression.
What's that?
It's an old expression.
What is?
Push up, Daisy.
Push up daisies, smell the rose. Reality is totally peaceful in the sense that everything is in perfect balance. It's a perfect dynamic equilibrium. And it's also completely peaceful. It's also perfectly peaceful in the sense that there is nothing that an individual needs to do. There's no effort required.
I found that whatever happened to me happened, that I started to become aware of things that I was not aware of before.
Mm-hmm.
Like now, when I dream, I always know I'm dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
Before, I didn't. I used to get totally 100% involved in the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I still dream, of course.
Mm.
But on some level or other, I know it's as unreal as this is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, that, and everyday life.
Yeah.
And that was one of the surprises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Row, row your boat.
We're calling this unreal again. It's real and it's
Oh
unreal.
yeah, John just did.
Okay.
Calling it something doesn't change what it is.
Doesn't
Yeah.
change
It's pointing to
This is real, but it is a real appearance within actuality, as opposed to a really an independently existing world that you exist in as a small, very small and vulnerable part.
That's the point.
because identity changes.
It doesn't change. You see what it actually is. Erroneous identity is disproved. When you see what this is, then what you thought it is disproved and becomes irrelevant. When you see what you are, what you thought you were, is disproved and so becomes irrelevant. It doesn't actually change, you just see what it actually is. And then you also see that it's the same thing it always was, but you somehow weren't able to recognize it and you were misinterpreting it.
I was going to say things matter less, but actually things matter differently.
So that's interesting to me what you just said. So things matter differently. How different? I mean, what do you mean by that?
The urgency of outcome is gone. The notion that, oh my God, this is really important because if it doesn't work out, such and such, something horrible could happen.
Yeah.
That's gone completely.
There's still importance to the extent that if you let the water keep bubbling, you are going to have it overflow, but it's not like crucial and critical. If it does, you work it up. Big deal.
Because you come to see what you actually are, you come to see what this actually is, and you see that in the most profound sense, what you are and what this is invulnerable and is not going to be damaged by circumstances. By all means, you can deal with circumstances artfully and effectively. Keep your house clean and keep yourself healthy and, so on and so forth. But there's no urgency of, oh my God, I really have to do this or else something horrible is going to happen. Because you know that in actuality, you are invulnerable. Because whatever happens, it will happen, and then what will be the case? Here you are. And that is not going to change. And you get a very profound sense of that is the case and of the profundity of that.
Would you say that the energy of identity is there in a different way and is a part of something else?
Yeah.
So that identity is with this rather
Yes.
than a focus on
Yeah,
this.
identity is actual. Identity is not wrong. Identity doesn't need to be destroyed or disproved. It's just that identity is actually this, not you
Right.
as a body or a body mind or a history or a lifetime or something like that.
So that.
But our sense of identity, our sense of being, our sense of ourselves is true. But it's based in what we actually are, which is this actuality, this presence. It's not based in what it's misinterpreted to be, i.e., a body or a person, and so on and so forth.
And that isn't surprising because you actually know that.
Yeah, it feels exactly the same, but you see what the feeling refers to.
It becomes another apparition, in a sense. I mean, if you want to.
Sure, you can say that, but it's an
It still
intrinsic.
feels the same, in
Yeah.
a sense.
Sure, but
But
it's
not so heavy. I mean,
Well,
it's not.
yeah, it's real. I mean,
It's still real.
the sense I am is 100% true. But I is not Peter Brown.
It's not so important.
I am is like saying the radiance is. And it is. That's absolutely true. And it's as true as it ever was, and it feels the same way it ever felt.
But I am means something completely different now.
Yeah. Yeah, because it doesn't refer to,
Doesn't refer to
a human being or a history or any of these other things.
I mean, there's all. I lived my life thinking that I am meant something about an individual.
Yeah. But there is no individual. It's a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So, then there's no individual, but the apparition still keeps happening.
Sure.
It's just the perspective towards the apparition changes.
Yeah, because the perspective was erroneous. And when you see it's erroneous, the sensation is the same. The sensation is true. Your feeling of that you are is true. It's just that identifying the you with a body or with a personality was never true.
So then it becomes more of a virtual reality. I mean, you see the virtualness of the reality.
Well, I would say it becomes actually less of a virtual reality. It becomes more concrete, if
Much
anything.
more concrete.
Depends what you mean.
Because the seeing you is not real. It's a mode of reality.
Right.
That-
Okay.
So it's being a mode of reality. It's like a virtual reality, and so for me, that seems.
But it's a virtual reality when it's a seeming you, a partial you. When it's the actual you, it is reality itself, and the virtual portion of that is dissipated, is gone.
Right.
Oh. Okay.
So when I thought I am Peter Brown, that was a virtual reality. When I say I am reality itself, that's a certainty. That's an undeniable felt fact. It's just completely self-evident. It's completely concrete, completely actual.
It's the only thing that you know.
Yeah, it's undeniable, self-verifying.
Yeah, but there's nothing else
Yeah,
to know.
sure.
And so what happened to Peter Brown?
Nothing. He was never there. It was a misunderstanding.
So then Peter Brown went away with.
No, he was never there.
You know,
He doesn't need to go away because he was never there. It was always this.
You could say that Peter Brown was never anything more than just a character in a book, in a story.
Sure.
That's all it ever was. But
Peter Brown is like
Sense of
Peter Brown's like an email address.
yeah,
But that email
It's
address
just like an email address. If you send email to that address, I'll get it. But I'm not the email address,
and you never were.
and I never was.
It's like who a person thought they were yesterday.
Sure.
I mean, it's like that.
Yeah.
That it's not there.
Sure.
And who you think you are now is, it could be anything. I mean, just an interpretation.
Yeah, what you think you are is always an interpretation. But what you are is an actuality. And what you are is this presence, this system that is here. That looks like all this. It looks like your experience.
So the feeling tone changes. I mean, you talked about...
Yes and no.
You talked about it feels the same. I mean, I know this as a body.
Well, you think you know it as a body, but you don't actually know it as a body. That's a misunderstanding.
Okay, so it's not a body, but the feeling of being alive.
Right.
Is that what you're saying is the same? Because it seems to
Well,
be
yes and no.
common.
Yes and no. It's the same and not the same. Nothing is lost, but a lot is gained.
Okay.
Well, some things are lost. The falseness of the identity.
Well, yeah, but
Not lost in the
the
sense that it disappears.
yeah, it doesn't. Nothing disappears.
I'm just talking about physicality right now. Just physical sensation.
Physicality stays, and if anything, it increases. Not by actuality, but by the removal of a kind of a censorship which we impose on ourselves.
Huh. Interesting way to put it.
Yeah. Interpretation functionally acts like a censorship. It's a hypnosis whereby we don't notice or we downplay vast areas of our actual experience.
Huh. Interesting way to put it. Give an example.
All of the field of my experience is equally present, and it is all present as the sensation of my being, of my embodiment. So I feel this, but I also feel the presence of the walls, I feel the presence of you all, I feel all of these various qualities, and they all are one system of my being, of my embodiment. So as where before I might have felt my body and thought I saw the wall over there very vaguely, now my experience of the wall is extremely intimate,
More present.
exactly as intimate as the sense of touch within my hands, say. And it's all one presence, one field of presence that is one system that is me.
Yeah.
And there's no upplaying of some things and downplaying of other things. And as a result, some things that were upplayed before seem to be downplayed, but they aren't actually.
It's not upplaying and downplaying, but there's... I'm as aware of that wall, as you say, as I am with my toes. But I don't put my attention on that wall in the same way, not in the same way, with the same feeling tone, if somebody said, or emphasis that I do with my toes.
No?
I can differentiate between the two.
Oh, well, of course.
It's not all one homogeneous mass.
No, but if you contrast the way your field of experience was before you had realization, with what it is like now, what would you say the difference is like?
No separation.
If you were going to
There's
characterize
no
it?
separation, yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I'm trying to indicate when I say no separation. That sense of separation
You're
seems
sensing
to
the
have been.
oneness and unity of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the sense of separation, but at the same time, my experience of my toes is different to my experience of the wall.
Different, but not more or less real, more or less present.
No, less. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's different.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's absolute sensitivity and differentiation for me. You know, I
But
can.
didn't you? Now, in retrospect, didn't you always have that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
Well,
like
I did, but
you suddenly got a new awareness.
No, I did, but I didn't experience it like that because there was a kind of a hypnosis,
Yes.
a kind of a censorship. I mean, I like I said, I've been putting it as if it was a kind of a censorship,
Yeah.
where it was like like a hypnotic mechanism where certain things were magnified in importance and urgency, and I would fixate on my attention on them, and other things were very ghostly and removed and at a distance. And now everything appears with a uniform clarity. I mean, not that they're not differentiable, and they of course have their qualities that they have, but it's all evenly. Everything is evenly present and with exactly the same. Well, I don't know how to put it verbally, but anyway, there's an evenness and it's a complete accessibility and clarity now.
It's like a texture. There's a uniform texture or something.
Yeah.
Texture is not the right word, but there isn't
Uniform access.
access. Yeah.
Whereas before the access was very some places there was a dullness and a fuzziness.
But
It was being
it turns
created.
out that that's all self-imposed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was
Learned.
a hypnosis.
Whatever it is, it's
Yeah.
hypnosis. Yeah.
You know, and when you see this, that removes, that dissipates, that's demolished.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of false protection system.
Well, maybe.
that was set up.
It might be. I don't know. It's hard to say. But anyway, it was. It's artificial, and this is merely seeing. This is coming to see what is
natural.
actually the case. What's natural. What's objectively so, rather than what is being spin doctored essentially into existence.
It's something like, for me, when I was growing up, I believed what was in the newspapers.
Right.
And I don't anymore.
Right.
It's that same sort of difference.
Yeah. Right. Exactly so. Yeah.
I think one of the things that has recently happened to me is that I'm noticing the superficiality of things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unimportant.
Probably the meaninglessness of things that are happening.
Which kinds of things?
Well, just anything. If I
Stories?
read something about, like John said, some news event,
Oh, right, yeah.
or somebody tells me something, that oh, this is going to happen, blah blah blah, and it just there's no meaning there like it used to be.
Yeah, right.
Importance.
Importance, yeah.
Right.
I guess that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, nothing whatsoever that people think or can say is true, and also has virtually any importance. So.
Including yourself.
Well, of course, but people, anything that can be said in human language and talk.
I mean, I think all sorts of crazy stuff.
Oh, dude, should live here.
Thanks.
You know what? It's okay, I don't want to live there.
What I find different and surprising is being aware of energy and things going on around me that I was completely unaware of before. It's not important stuff, but it's just like feeling a person's energy.
Yeah.
I probably felt it before, I just didn't hear it or let it in. Now
Yeah, I think that when we, from an ignorant point of view, there's a lot of discrediting of experience, of just, things are just relegated to being noise or unimportant, or just like noise in the system, even though its actual content, we just write it off as being, as not being relevant, and we have a very much of a tunnel vision on a very highly selective portion of our experience. Whereas, of course, in actuality, all experience is present experientially, and has a self validity within its own gamut.
It's funny listening to you guys. In retrospect, I see that the struggle for me in growing up was I found it very hard to learn to differentiate and to find some things more important than other things, because I was being told that's what it was, and I never really got the hang of it. But I started believing that I was supposed to. I think that's what happens. We start believing the differentiations and the importance.
But I think all of those differentiations are learned.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
I mean,
I struggled to try and learn them because it didn't seem right. But what you're saying about feeling energies and stuff, I was always feeling energies and being confused about it because of what I was hearing that was lies from what I was experiencing.
I have no recollection of feeling any. Feeling the stuff that I'm aware of now, I have no recollection. Before I was taught to see the world in a certain way.
Yeah.
Is there some correlation between what you're talking about and the idea of time and timelessness? In other words,
Well, some correlation.
Here now.
Some correlation, yeah. I mean,
We select certain things at certain times
Yeah.
from the unity thing and call it moving through time.
well, it's not as heavy-handed as that. I mean, the actual condition of time is very multidimensional and slippery. And our notion of time and being embedded in time and being in the passing of time and all that is very simplistic. So the more you are with the actuality of time as it actually is, the more you can be with it in terms of maybe being with it as timelessness or as multidimensionality or as various sort of nonlinear modes that it can be seen as being. Because what time is itself is not the simple thing that we're used to thinking it is.
I have a very, very lucid experience. So lucid, I don't know if it's my fantasy or otherwise, but behind, when I think about it, or when I put attention on it, behind reality, there's this just all kinds of stuff. And not interesting stuff, just energy stuff, lines and light and stuff going on. And it's very, very, very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I speculate that I'm superimposing this on top of that, I'm taking something out of that sort of contains every possibility.
Uh-huh.
And this possibility is what I'm looking at, to the point where the repository of everything is just a kind of almost non-existent, just a shimmer or something.
Sure, I have experience like that. I mean, there's, the way I put that is there's many, many dimensions of experience, and they don't necessarily cross-correlate with each other. A great deal of my experience is like that, where it's very non-linear and uncoordinated and just sort of chaotic surgings and things like this. And yet, of course, I have complete sensory clarity simultaneously. And the interrelationship between these dimensions is interesting to speculate about it.
the thing that happened to me with time was I no longer believe my memory. And so
But you have something like memory that you call that. Like you recall.
Well, you know, I recall what you just said, but I actually don't. I mean,
You know you're not recalling exactly.
I'm not recalling exactly, and even if I recall the actual words, I still don't recall everything about that moment. I mean, nothing that I remember is accurate. Whether it's from when I was 6 or whether it was from 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I know that for a fact, and I never used to. That doesn't stop me disagreeing with Irma a lot about what she said and what she didn't say.
That's politics, though. That's different.
Whole other subject.
Or with anybody else. I mean, it's not.
Oh, I know.
But
Luckily, there's recording devices.
don't believe in that either.
You used to believe that your memories were accurate?
Well, I used to think, you know, like
That you were actually remembering something?
I remember what I did last Wednesday, or I remember how it was to be 12, or I remember, you know, that event in my life when something very significant happened. You know, my mother died. I remember the reactions that I had when my mother died.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't.
The best you can remember is impressions. That's it.
Yeah, I have no fucking idea what I remember when my mother died.
Right. Yeah, I always thought of memories as inaccurate, just impressions of things. Because I never agreed with anything. My siblings, five other siblings, you know, none of us ever agreed on how things happen in any one so-called event or party or happening, or it's like everybody had a different opinion on how it went, and that's like, what?
Well, I don't have that problem because I've got 2 sisters who seem to have Alzheimer's.
They
seem to have Alzheimer's. They don't remember anything from our childhood.
So it was up to you to remember.
And
You're the historian.
I still do recall all that stuff inaccurately.
Yeah.
My memories are getting stronger and stronger. I mean, I mentioned once not too long ago that I can remember just walking down a street when I was 10 or 12 or 15 or more. And I remember everything about it just comes up. And before I couldn't. I mean, until recently, I didn't have such a strong visual memory.
Mm.
But in looking at that, it's present tense. I'm not remembering something back there. If I tried to remember back there, it would disappear and I'd be very fuzzy. But if I remember it in the present, as a part of the present, but not quite three-dimensional and all filled out, it's very, very clear. It's part of my present experience.
Right.
And whether I actually did that or not is a philosophical, conundrum.
Yeah, but and this is an aspect of, like, you know, you were talking about timelessness and all that. This is an aspect of the whole issue of time. The only time that exists is what exists here. So exactly what that is and exactly how that is interesting, and again is not necessarily simple, as we may be used to thinking of it as being.
Because that would imply everything is going on right now.
Well, in any sense, the only everything there is this. So it would have to be, if there is a past, it's here. If there is a future, it's here. And the way in which the past and future exist has to be researched here now, because that's where it can be found. Because it can't be found elsewhere.
Is it just a matter of focus?
But
something into focus, and that's now.
Well, focus is always now, but what does that mean? What does that consist of?
What you think of as real.
Well,
it becomes very clear.
Real is always energy presence, or radiant presence, as I call it. The question is, does it refer to anything else? Does it refer to some supposed actual conditions or actual entities, or is it just patterning appearing, like in a dream. You know, in a dream you can remember what happened a year previously in the world of the dream. But obviously you're remembering it and creating it right then, because there was no year previously.
The implication is there's a three-dimensional world, a three-dimensional person, but really it's just the memory is a present experience.
Yeah, and there isn't, and in a dream, the dream shows us that there isn't even, the present circumstances aren't even actually there. It's all just radiance that is appearing as if it was the present circumstance. So anyway, it's all rather tenuous and interesting to look into. But the only place to look is here, of course. And so time exists here now. And so all aspects of it can be found here now. The sense that there's a past or a future is here now, and in the way that it is, whatever that is. But again, none of these issues or qualities can be resolved. You can't find what anything is, because nothing is finite. Nothing is. Well, it's hard to put it clearly. Nothing can be found, nothing can be resolved, nothing can be brought into final coherence of being something very specific that you can find and delineate and say, yeah, now I've got it. You know, everything is a question mark. Everything is a starting point for inquiry, and as you proceed on the inquiry, it becomes more and more tenuous rather than more and more coherent and focused. And that applies to time, it applies to entities, it applies to all aspects of experience, sensory experience, it applies to radiance, it applies to space, it applies to any quality that you start with that seems to be something. As you pursue investigating it, looking into it closer and closer and more precisely, it actually gets vaguer and vaguer and less focused rather than more and more focused.
It's not like chasing the present moment.
Yeah.
Because to make it clear and concise and come to a final resolution means to hold it in the present and expand, but the present is changing instantly all the time.
Yeah, maybe. But you can't find any actual change either. I mean, basically things are most in focus when you don't look at them too clearly. Things are most coherent when you don't look at them too clearly. You begin to look at anything clearly and it becomes less and less coherent. On any parameter, on any range of qualities whatsoever.
Because it discovers mutability.
Yeah, it's lack of coherence. It's lack of coherent identity. Nothing has a core, in a way. It's all sort of innuendo, and you go looking for what anything is, and it becomes like a mirage where it seems to be very specific when you aren't with it too closely, and you go up to it closer and closer and try and investigate, and it disappears. Everything is like that, everything whatsoever.
So back to what you and John were talking about. So everything is experience, and experience is radiant presence. So the experience of the wall would be no different than the experience of the foot, and that's kind of why everything...
Right. Yeah, because experience is made of experience.
Mm-hmm. And so
and any particular experience is just made of experience. Mm-hmm. And since experience is made of experience, it's all the same stuff.
Yeah, so it's just experience.
It's like you dream about a mountain and you dream about your body. It's just dream. And the mountain and the body are made of the same thing, because that's what's present there, is dreaming. And likewise, what's present here is experience. So I see the wall, it's experience that's actually happening. I feel my hand, it's experience that's actually happening. And so if you look closely at what's actually there, you find exactly the same thing with no variation. I mean, they call it radiant presence because it is present. I mean, not that you can say what that means, but it's still undeniably the case. And it's radiant in the sense that it seems to have qualities. It's not just nothing. It's not just blank. It's all of these qualities presenting. And it's endless qualities. And you look at the qualities, and the qualities have qualities, and the qualities of the qualities have qualities, and so on. But it doesn't resolve. It doesn't converge into any coherence. It's just a never-ending sea. I mean, you try and find what anything is. You keep finding. It's not like you don't get results. You keep finding. You keep finding. You keep finding. But everything you find just adds to the. It doesn't hone in on a point or a core. It just is more characteristics and more characteristics and more characteristics endlessly.
And it doesn't make a difference, right?
Huh?
It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all the same. Everywhere you look, you ultimately find the same condition. Basically, everywhere you look, all you find is experience. And experience doesn't resolve. It's not, you can never say what experience is either. Experience is a transcendental, miraculous condition. But it's actual. And look at that, it's quitting time. Good night, online people.